there's this massive misconception that you need to be a therapist in order to be therapeutic. You don't. You just need to be a human. You need to sit in that awkward, uncomfortable, uncertain space of not being able to take their problem away. But by listening and being with and just caring, you will take their pain away. We have to move from awareness to behavior. Our world depends on it. This is the global warming of the health industry. It's taking more lives than anything between the ages of 19 to 45, than road accidents and heart disease. I would say 90% of the population is coping, not healing. Yeah, I remember the exact moment in my life where I knew something was very wrong. And it was in the passenger seat of my mum's car in the shop outside Woolworths shopping centre. And I was repetitively touching the dashboard, blinking over and over, saying the word God out loud on repeat. And I remember she looked at me and said, "Hey Mitch, what are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know, but I always feel upset. And I think that I'm a bad person." And so we went to the doctor, and the doctor looked at me and said, "Mitch, you have acute obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety." I had no idea what that meant. I walked out the front of the doctor's office, looked up at my mum, who to this day is still my best friend, and I asked her, "Why is my brain broken?" And she started to cry. And it was in that moment where I thought, something is very wrong here, and I need to do everything I can to hide this from the world. Had lots of friends, played sport, did well academically, had a girlfriend, like everything was thriving, but I just got really bloody good at pretending, and I would be breaking more and more on the inside and yet thriving more on the outside. Like my OCD had morphed and grown into all types of different compulsions and intrusive thoughts. By my late teens, I'd developed panic disorder and major depression. In fact, I remember sitting on a beach in Thailand just after finishing high school with my girlfriend at the time and a bunch of friends. And it was this perfect beach, this perfect sunset, something out of a Leonardo DiCaprio movie. And I took a sip of beer and I put it in the sand. And my thought was, wow, I don't want to be here alive anymore. And I knew that everyone else was feeling the exact opposite. Like, this is exactly where I want to be. I'm in my element, I'm thriving. And that's when things started to get really scary, because the band-aids that I was applying throughout my life weren't sticking as much anymore. And I knew that I had to do the work and confront what was going on, but I was just way too petrified to lift up the hood. And I was on a roll with regard to career and everything else. So my motto was just don't slow down and distract yourself enough to scrape through. I think when the mental ill health issues started to kind of not just multiply, but vary. So I was used to OCD. I knew what anxiety felt like. That was stuck inside my DNA. But when I started to experience symptoms like depersonalization, which is a very rare thing that makes you feel out of body, you're completely lucid and sane, but life just feels off, and you don't feel connected to your somatic experience nor to other people or environments. And that's when I was really worried, because I was trying to articulate how I was feeling, very rarely, I might add, to people around me, just to kind of tease out to see if anyone could relate even closely to this experience. And I remember always receiving, even from the very few times I went and tried to talk to a psychologist, few and far between, I would get this dreaded left eyebrow raise, which is that kind of, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. And that would result in me disorganizing even further and retreating even more back into myself or away from myself. I could feel the gravel underneath my feet as I was falling toward rock bottom for many years, but in particular the last few months before I really crashed, I knew that that was coming. I mean, people who are super polished and high performing should be like the main indicator that something might be going on other than what they're presenting to the world. There is often, not always, but very often, a seed of insecurity in which that is growing from. You know, coping is where you do things to avoid feeling. And coping can look really healthy. It can look like trips to Bali, juice cleanses, breathing techniques, going to yoga. But really, if we're doing these things in order to get away from ourselves and ignore what's going on beneath the surface, they're not actually getting us better. The unfortunate, harsh, inconvenient reality is that the only way around is through. And I found that it took until breaking point for me to forcibly confront, work through and process stuff that I'd been putting to the side and running away from my whole life, only to realize that that was my key to freedom. And the brain is hardwired to avoid pain at all costs. The brain doesn't really care if you're happy. You know, it's looking for certainty more than it is looking for what is true or healthy. That's why people go to jobs that they hate, stay in relationships that are toxic, or perpetually scrape by in their life with anxiety and depression, because at least this is a controllable entity. Anything outside of that is unknown. And so we sit in this suffering and this pile of mud because we fear what it would look like to do the work and the journey toward the other side of that. And in all the ironies, I was so scared of going to professional help. Didn't want to talk about my feelings to a therapist, that my logic was, I'll avoid it by becoming one. So I literally applied to do my master's degree in clinical psychology whilst working full-time for Microsoft. Told my manager at the time I need to take annual leave to go study consumer behavior on the East Coast, when really I was just trying to keep myself alive. I got to class, and in the first hour of the first day, I had this overwhelming realization that this is what I was put on the earth to do, without a doubt in my mind. And I haven't doubted it for a moment since. But at that moment, I was still very confused because I was a mess. How would I ever be in service to someone else? And shortly after that is when the sliding down rock bottom became thudding to a grinding halt. And I checked myself into this outpatient clinic, and it was there that I was the closest I've ever come to taking my own life. You know, it's funny, people don't really believe me when I say this, but a single YouTube video is the reason I'm here today, outside of the unconditional love that my mum showed me. She was like the life raft to keep me afloat, but I needed a wave to bring me to shore. And the wave was this dude in his mid-20s who decided to stare down the barrel of his webcam and share his story. His name's Harris. I've never met him before, never spoken to him before to this day. And now as a global keynote speaker, working with some of the biggest companies in the world, consulting to the likes of United Nations, Corporate Mental Health Alliance, and really getting warmed up on what will be a life mission to create a better world. He has no idea that he was the catalyst to change the trajectory of everything. And what was that moment was seeing him wear his heart on his sleeve, and me for the first time ever realizing that this is what it's like to be understood. And I think most suffering exists, most emotional suffering is not the sum of the problems that we experience. It's the disconnection we feel through them. And what I mean by that is anxiety, depression, OCD, a global pandemic, losing your job, financial hardship. Like, problems are painful for sure, but where most true suffering exists is in the membrane that surrounds a problem. And the most toxic membrane of all is shame. It is the disconnection from a raw truth that really buries a lot of people. Like me thinking to myself, I'm crazy, I'm unlovable, things will never get better, this won't change. I mean, that was so much harder than actually being anxious or doing a compulsion, because a lot of that stuff is manageable with the right help, but help never comes because we never go through the first step to healing, which is to accept the truth that I'm not okay. And what his story did was, like, for the first time ever, provide this like anti-infection needle that popped this shame membrane or this inflammation that I was just stuck in my whole life keeping sick, and not only released a ton of emotional pain in and of itself, but finally clean things up and allow me to go toward the thing that I'd been running away from my whole life. And I do think most people just sit on this outer layer of disconnected shame their whole life because it's too scary to reduce the inflammation. It's too scary to go beyond that protection mechanism that is trying to keep this core wound safe. But in all the ironies in the world, it's actually perpetuating the pain. And we band-aid, band-aid, band-aid. And the only solution to getting better, always, is connection first. Connecting heart first, not head first, is the biggest shift I believe we need to make as a society and in workplaces. All of us have emotions. 100% of us know what it's like to not be okay. Now, some of us know what it's like to really not be okay, a much larger number than you'd expect or we'd like to admit. Most people don't want to ask someone if they're okay because they're shit scared of hearing a, no, I'm not. And so what I would say is, instead of trying to avoid asking that question, learn what to do with the answer. And what to do with the answer is not to problem solve it. It is to sit in it. You know, questions like, can you tell me more? What's that been like for you? How long's that been happening? Or even a statement like, I have no idea what to say, I'm just really glad you told me and I want to try and understand, are so much more beneficial than, have you been exercising? Have you spoken to someone about this? Have you talked to your boss? Have you blah, blah, blah? Solutions, solutions, solutions. They will do those things if you give them a sense of care first. One of my biggest pet peeves on Are You OK Day or any day is when someone comes and finally tells you, has the enormous courage to say, I'm not doing great. And a supporter responds with, well, let me know if you ever want to chat. And they're like, fuck me, I'm trying. This is the thing. I'm doing the thing that you just asked me to do. And we'll direct them straight to professional help. There's this massive misconception that you need to be a therapist in order to be therapeutic. You don't. You just need to be a human. You need to sit in that awkward, uncomfortable, uncertain space of not being able to take their problem away. But by listening and being with and just caring, you will take their pain away. We have to move from awareness to behavior. Our world depends on it. This is the global warming of the health industry. It's taking more lives than anything between the ages of 19 to 45, than road accidents and heart disease. We can't expect colorful t-shirts, fun runs and bike rides, you know, as much as that is a positive intent, for those same people to put up streamers in the office and that day not genuinely check in on anyone. We can't have leaders at work saying, speak up, use EAP, go seek a counselor when you're not okay, and they themselves aren't doing those things or role modeling the behaviors. Time is up, man. How many people have to go before we realize that people only take action when they see it in action? If someone's at crisis, the first thing I would say is breathe. I can see that you're hurting. You're tired. There is no end in sight. You're in a very hard decision of wanting to live, but not this way. It's okay to rest in this just for a second and to be completely exhausted and not know which way to turn. Take a load off and know that it's not always going to be this way. This will pass. You're going to need to find something inside of you, the fucking lion, and you're going to need to fight. But you can, and you will. But for right now, I just need you to take stock. Know that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy, you're not broken. You will get through this, and we will get through this together. But I need you to fight. I wanted to be anyone else but me for my whole life. I think that's why I was depersonalizing and dissociating so much, is like I just wanted to run out of my own skin. And I'm still getting used to the fact that I now like who I am. And I like the way I think. And it surprises me when I'll catch myself in moments where I'm like, I'm really glad that I get to drive this car today, because I appreciate the perspective that I've been able to build. And that feels good. It feels good to want to be you. It feels good to want to be alive. I never wanted to die. I just didn't want to exist in the way that I was. And now I get to not only tolerate it, but thoroughly enjoy it and do some good stuff along the way.